My interest in millinery was actually a slightly accidental one. I studied fashion at Limerick School of Art and Design and went away to travel and to work, and when I came back there wasn't really a huge amount of work available in Ireland at the time, and strangely enough 2 opportunities came up, one in knitwear and one in millinery, and I took the millinery one thinking I'd go back into women's wear, and I fell in love with it and I never did. It's definitely amazing to see that Irish design is finally starting to be recognised, and the people that were, I think we came out of college at a bad time. We came out like right when the recession hit, and I think something about that has made people have to fight more for it and kind of be proven a little bit better, and they kind of pushed harder or something. They moved abroad or they tried to work abroad and things like that. So I think it's made people kind of sit up and look at Irish designers much more, because there are so many good ones here, but unfortunately a lot of them had to leave. It's kind of shown that we can do it just as good as the rest of them. Winning the Kerry Fashion Week Breakthrough Designer of the Year in 2014 was the very, very start of my business. I'd been working in millinery beforehand, but I had only started my business at the end of 2013. And that was the one thing that definitely pushed me into the limelight, and where it kind of got me a bit further than I might have if I hadn't won it. I think that awards like that, and I know a lot of different bodies in Ireland do them, are like an amazing way for designers to reach out to a wider audience. So a designer mightn't be heard of before, or so to even be nominated and to be able to show at something like that is like half the battle. You usually have to show a collection, or at least show images to some body of people that are usually quite influential in your industry. So even just starting that kind of can get you somewhere, and I think it's definitely a great thing for young designers. My talk for Bread and Butter for IDI was very, very interesting, because I found we were a very mixed bunch, because some of the other ones I've noticed are like certain themes, whereas the 3 of us were quite different but yet had similar interests. And I found that by the end of the talks we had all the same interest in Japan, and we all had referenced like Japanese architecture, Japanese films, Japanese the way of like life, the design ethics and everything. So I found that interesting that accidentally we all had that same vein, but I thought it was very, very interesting, and it's really, really inspiring to see other designers and to see what they do and to hear their inspiration and how they work, because that's what kind of motivates you to kind of go as well and to go back and start again. I definitely say if anyone wanted to start into millinery, to definitely find your own voice. It's quite a big market these days, and the ones that stand out to me anyway are definitely the ones that do something unique and something a bit different. Martha Lynn is doing some really interesting work with perspex. Margaret O'Connor does really, really beautiful textiles, which actually slightly draws on Old Irish as well. And I think if you go down that route, it's definitely going to be a bigger impact. That's one thing I definitely say to start out with, and still learn all the old traditional techniques. They're very, very important, and it's always good to learn traditional millinery like the craft that it was. You almost have to just find your voice, but like instinctively and naturally, before you think that you have to find a style, because in the long run that's what will make it work for you. But you have to just figure out what's right for you first and just play around with a lot of things, because you're never going to find it if you're looking for it. My process in millinery is a little bit different than normal. I do completely use traditional millinery techniques, but at the same time I create new fabrics and then incorporate them in traditional millinery. So I work the same I would have worked always in design and women's wear. You look for your inspiration, you take mood, you take colour, and then you start designing and creating shapes from that. And then I start creating the textiles and the fabrics. So that's probably the longest part of it. So I create the textiles and then I incorporate them into the shapes that I had designed at the start. How I ended up in Mexico working with Alejandra Quesada was I was actually looking for someone to work with and looking through the London Fashion Week designers and varying designers that were in London, thinking that's where I'd go, that's where all my friends were going to London. And I found her really, really interesting, and I applied to work with her, and she mailed me back and said my portfolio was interesting and she'd like me to work, but did I realise that she was based in Mexico City? And I said, no, I had not, but I might as well, sure, why not? I only realised the gravity of the situation when I walked out of the airport in Mexico, not a word of Spanish, and I had no idea where I was going. But it was a really, really good, interesting thing to do, because I think so many other of my friends ended up in London, and it's just so close, and the designers are more known, and I think I learned a lot more by going that far. It was the biggest culture shock ever. Like, we went up to her knitwear designer up in the hills, and they're like, it's like absolute like horrible poverty. It was this like tiny little black room with like no light, and this was apparently normal. Like, it wasn't that she was just using somebody cheap. Like, it was like one of the better ones she had found, and like all these little women sitting around with knitting machines knitting, and they had like no bathroom or anything, and it was like shacks on top of each other all up in the hills. It was crazy. And then you go into the city and it's so shiny and it's like beautiful in some places, and then there's like kids standing on the street like begging and stuff. So it was just, yeah, it was a real huge culture shock, different than normally working in fashion. So I still use the old design process that I would have used when I worked in women's wear, where I find inspiration, and that can be anything from, I think my first collection was Japanese horror films, and then I have found it in the strangest places. Like, last year was looking at these sea creatures. So like, I ended up looking at geometry for one collection, and then that turned into natural geometry and how things can naturally occur and make certain shapes, and these like amazing sea creatures with these like strange cells, and the shapes and the colours that they create was really, really beautiful. So I started looking at them and kind of looking at how to kind of emulate that idea, where you like multiply certain shapes and then you end up with one big form. So I usually start with that inspiration, and then I try to create a textile similar to that. Bjork is absolutely amazing. She like always has the most amazing headgear on her, and I have found brilliant milliners and hat designers through her. She wears them all the time, like any photo shoot you see of her on stage and everything, and I would actually always like nearly find great milliners through her. I love her music anyway, but yeah, she supported this Asian designer who actually is based in London, called Maiko Takeda, I think. Again, the Asian thing, but she wore her designs for quite a while, and I definitely always look to her, and every time I see her with something new, I look at for the designer that she's been wearing. I definitely think that it kind of goes in circles, and you see kind of resurgence of like hat wearing like through the decades. Like, it was huge in the 50s and then started to die down in the 60s, and then it kind of came back again in the 80s. So we're kind of like secretly hoping and waiting for people to come do it again. But I would definitely like to see people. I wear hats every day, regardless of what it is, whether if it's like a turban or a fedora in the winter or whatever. So I don't know, I think it finishes your outfit a bit, I think, and it's got a purpose. It's warm in the winter. We live in a very cold country. I would love to see it come back, definitely. Like, I do love the fact that hats have become such a big thing for the races and for weddings, because that's where you actually get to make the most creative hats, because people don't mind wearing something that is really outlandish and like quite strange. Well, not strange, that you wouldn't wear every day going down doing your shopping, but yeah, I'd like to see a good balance, like where they'd still like to wear those for special occasions and then wear hats regularly, definitely.